The monotony of Zerpina's existence was, by her own quiet admission, the very thing that kept her sane. Her job as a remote data compiler, a role that involved translating vast sheets of meaningless numbers into slightly less meaningless reports, demanded discipline and allowed her to remain comfortably isolated in her small dust mote-filled apartment. Her days were a sequence of quiet routines, the hum of the old refrigerator, the predictable ping of email notifications, and the Thursday ritual of visiting the single thrift shop in the adjacent, perpetually gray suburb of Arkham Heights. It was on a particularly damp Thursday, when the air felt thick and fungoid, that Zerpina paused her search for a sturdier coffee mug and found the box. It sat on a high, dusty shelf behind a stack of moth-eaten linens, hidden not by intent, but by sheer neglect. It was small, roughly the size of a cigar box, and appeared to be carved from some form of polished black wood, not ebony, but something deeper, duller, like solidified midnight. The surface was not smooth, but composed of hundreds of minute, interlocking geometric planes, none of which seemed to obey the rules of Euclidean space. There was no visible hinge, seam, or latch. The whole thing seemed held together by an unspoken, sickening symmetry. When Zerpina picked it up, a faint, cold thrum passed through the bone of her wrist, leaving behind a sensation not unlike misplaced memory. It had no price tag. The proprietor, a woman whose face was perpetually obscured by the shadow of her own hair, merely shrugged and murmured, "Take it. Been collecting dust for a century. We can't move it." Back in her sterile apartment, the box rested on her glass coffee table, absorbing all the light around it. Zerpina felt the quiet, mundane comfort of her routine begin to fray. The numbers on her work spreadsheets, data for quarterly sales in the agricultural sector, started to shimmer. They were no longer simply digits. They were symbols, arranged in patterns that suggested vast, ancient architectures that defied measurement. The box began to exert a subtle pressure. Zerpina spent the first night pacing, her ears strained for sounds that were not there, her eyes darting toward shadows that never moved. On the second night, she was driven to obsession. She ran her fingers over the slick, unnerving planes of the obsidian wood, realizing that the patterns were not carvings, but a language, a cipher that communicated not through sound, but through an internal, visceral sense of wrongness. The language was not read with the eyes, but with the pressure behind the optic nerve. She felt her mind stretching, rearranging itself to accommodate the impossible syntax of a reality that bled through the casing. She found a way in, not by force, but by accident. In the dead stillness of 3 a.m., she idly pressed 2 adjacent planes that, to the touch, felt slightly warmer than the others. There was no click, no sound, merely a sudden, agonizing shift in the air pressure of the room. The box unfolded. It did not open along a seam. It resolved into a new configuration, revealing its contents. Inside, resting on a bed of dry black moss, was a single shriveled object. It was amorphous, bone-white, and felt unnervingly soft, like the preserved tongue of something that had never existed on Earth. It smelled of ozone, seawater left to stagnate for epochs, and fear. Zerpina stared at it for hours. She developed a profound and horrifying certainty. This object was not made, it had merely been delivered, and its delivery required the temporary erasure of distance itself. The derangement began with taste. Her sense of hearing sharpened to a painful degree. She could hear the wet, slow grinding of the Earth's crust far beneath her foundation. She could hear the incessant, cold chatter of molecules in the ceiling drywall. Her work became impossible. The sales data now openly mocked her, forming colossal, echoing equations that calculated the orbital decay of sanity. She realized the numbers were counting the days until she became the data point. One night, driven by an unnamed, nauseating desire, Zerpina placed the white object on her tongue. It dissolved immediately into a warm, metallic brine that tasted of copper, forgotten stars, and the silent agony of a billion trapped consciousnesses. The remaining days are difficult to chart. Zerpina's perspective shifted violently. The walls of her apartment, once protective, became thin membranes separating her from the crushing, endless void. She learned that the paint was made of dried, pulverized screams. The ordinary sounds of the neighborhood, a distant siren, a dog barking, were revealed to be the desperate rhythmic screams of things trapped just outside the veil of reality, things that only wanted to be let in. She no longer saw the world as three-dimensional. Every surface was now a membrane stretched over a horrific multi-sided existence. The box had taught her that reality was less a structure and more a mistake. She saw the clock on the wall, not as an instrument of time, but as a vast revolving horror, its hands slicing through dimensions, counting down to something immense and wet. She knew that time was no longer linear. She was experiencing yesterday and tomorrow simultaneously, and both were equally terrible. Her skin began to crawl, not from insects but from the sudden profound knowledge that her body was not her own. It was an assemblage of borrowed meat temporarily held together by the gravity of her false name. Then came the change that shattered the world's false shell. The tremors started globally, not geological but perceptual. The sound of the refrigerator hum that Serpina had charted became the universal background noise, a rhythmic, deep space thrumming picked up in the static of every television and the silence of every human ear. Her apartment, once a cage, became the receiver. The final days were marked by a hideous echoing sound that poured from Serpina's mouth. It was not human speech nor agony, but a high, wet, sustained giggle, a sound that was pure, mindless delight at the universe's sudden collapse into cosmic simplicity. She sat motionless on the floor, her body rigid, her eyes wide, glassy, and focused on an infinite point in the corner of the ceiling. The Serpina that was the data compiler, the woman of routines, was entirely gone, replaced by a conduit of terrifying, joyful madness. Outside, the world was following. People stopped in the streets, tilted their heads, and began to listen to the new, subtle thrumming. They smiled vacantly. Traffic stopped not due to accidents, but because drivers simply forgot the function of their hands and feet, content to stare at the new impossible angles the buildings had secretly assumed. The global data networks, once Serpinia's domain, ceased to transmit numbers and instead pulsed with the repeating complex pattern of the box's cipher, the contagion of geometric understanding spreading through every fiber optic cable, every satellite, every human mind. Her final entry, scratched onto a spreadsheet printout with the nib of a forgotten pen, was now rendered meaningless, save for the single word carved deeply into the bottom margin, repeating infinitely, counting. When the landlady finally entered the apartment weeks later, drawn not by smell, but by the fact that the refrigerator hum had become overpoweringly loud, she found the room silent except for the low, deafening thrum. Serpina was gone. She was neither dead nor alive, merely absent. The open, empty black box rested on the coffee table. The landlady, a woman whose face was perpetually obscured by the shadow of her own hair, walked slowly across the floor. She noticed the warped, dark, circular mark where something impossibly heavy and perfectly round had briefly rested. She looked up at the corner of the ceiling, where Serpina's last gaze had been fixed, and then she smiled. It was a wide, unnervingly vacant smile that stretched her features beyond recognition. She placed her hand on the box, feeling the cold thrum pass into her own bones, and began to emit a sound, the high, wet, sustained giggle that was now echoing in every corner of the suddenly quiet, geometrically correct global Arkham Heights. The landlady picked up the box and quietly closed the apartment door, leaving the silence to be swallowed by the sound of the sleeping god's heartbeat.